I'm Sherry from Mrs. S Room. I'm Mrs. S Room on TPT. And today we're going to be talking about how to get your reading articles ready, and that is your guided reading portion of your language program. If you haven't already watched my full tutorial on how I run my language, you might want to go back and watch that first, because that's probably going to give you a great overview before you get into this one, because this will not contain everything. So, my daily schedule looks like this. It has silent reading, writing mini lesson, guided reading, read aloud, shared reading, cursive, morphology, and spiral language built in. But of course, you know as well as I do that you can't build everything in every day. So some days are just going to be more busy than others. So this is a better overview of how my language looks from day to day. And let me dive in and talk about where I put my guided reading, because you're not going to see that on here. On Monday, I'm going to read with every student in groups. And we're going to read according to their ability level. So some I may have given the article ahead so that they could read really well. And some I might have them only read key phrases. Some I'm going to have them parrot read. So they're going to mouth the words as somebody else is reading until they feel comfortable. Whatever works for them. We always start with silent reading. That 10 to 15 minutes gives me the time to get in the door. You know there's going to be recess issues. And to get kids started. And so that's when I pull my first group. And as I'm pulling my first group, everybody else should be silent reading. So I really do spend the month of September reinforcing positive silent reading traits. If they're sticking with the book, if they're not going up to get another book, they get rewards. And we do classroom economy. I have another video on that on YouTube as well. But I reward them heavily. I might go around the entire time they're silent reading, rewarding people that are doing what they're supposed to be doing, because I find that really builds that confidence and that stamina in reading. And that's what we really want to see, because there's no way you can do guided reading if you're constantly managing people getting up and changing books or being off task. Now, depending on the grade level, in a grade 3-4, I'm probably going to run the rest of the tasks as centers so that it's very prescribed. Okay, so 20 minutes of silent reading is up. Ding. Go to your centers. And I might have to take a long time getting that reinforced in September and October on how we move through centers, how you know who's in what center to go to. And I don't have a picture of my pocket chart, but I used a pocket chart with the group name and then all the kids' names on it, and then put what centers they were supposed to be at that day. You can do that. You can just tell them to switch and you have it in your day book. Either way works. However, since I've had 6, 7, and 5 most of my career, I would say I tend to give them a list. So I would tell them that they need to get so much done, and I would put that up on my smart board. So I would put up silent reading, bell work, morphology, kind of like this actually, only one day at a time. And they know to check that off. For some students, and you know who they are, sometimes you need to print a visual schedule and put it on their desk so that they can actually use an erase marker and check it off for themselves. Whatever works for them, however that's going to help them. So this is what it looks like. You'll notice in green, this is where I'm doing a direct lesson. Now, what I have not added is that on Monday, most of my time is direct lessons because I'm reading with every reading group. So as soon as they finish silent reading, they know to go on to bell work. And if they're a younger group, I might say, okay guys, it's time to go on to bell work. And everybody goes on to that. It depends on how you want to run it. Older groups, the list is on the board. I go over the list. They already know what it is. So I don't need to go over it, and they know what to do. And they move on to the next task, and then I'm pulling my next group as soon as they're doing that. I do find I have 20 minutes to spare at the end where I'm not pulling groups. I've met with every group. Sorry, let me move me. Okay, so on Monday, this is my busiest day, bar none. On Monday, it is insane. You don't get a break on Monday. So if you have a heavy duty day on Monday, you might want to switch when you start this and do your guided reading. Maybe you want to read on Tuesday. So while there's silent reading, I pull one group to read with. While they are reading, you might go over things like vocabulary words, fluency, pronunciation, morphology. This word has the same ending as the previous word. Maybe it sounds the same. Maybe you're doing mini lessons on that as you're reading. It really does depend on my group. So for my higher groups, I tend to focus on the content, the connections, the predictions, and the purpose. For my lower groups, I'm focusing on the vocabulary, the fluency, the pronunciation, and the morphology. Morphology particularly for my lowest group because you really want them to build those skills. So, for example, in my lower level morphology program, we do like SH words, and this helps them because if they can read this SH word, possibly they can read next SH word. Or we're looking at the OU sound in words and showing what other sounds it can make and how it applies in different words. So we're really trying to build that word knowledge in them so that they can read independently. So this is the time for short and informative conversations based on what they need to understand. When you are done with that group, you can assign the task for day one. I will tell you that in my own personal reading articles that I use and sell on TPT, the task for day one is always simple. It is either multiple choice where they're just highlighting 4 answers, or it is like highlighting words that they didn't understand, highlighting a part of the text that they are going to use later in another comprehension question so that they can go back and they've already found the answer. They just didn't know that's what they were doing. So we really want to get them deep diving into the text, rereading, really looking at what they can do. You'll notice this is my grade 7 one. I don't do this type of task in grade 3 or 4 because it's just too much for my little guys. But when they are older, they can do like generate a whole list of questions. And you encourage them to push themselves because some of them can. If they can't and they get 5 questions, great. Monday is meant to be easy because they have a lot to do on Monday as well because they're reading with me. So it takes time out of their day. They go to work on the task and then you pull the next group, and other students move on to the spelling bell ringers for the week while you complete the reading with all your groups. So this is an example of my grade 7 article series, Great Barrier Reef, because we're looking at ecological focuses. Tuesday, students are going to begin again with silent reading. So my students really know to do this, and we spend the first 2 months building those routines so students are able to do this independently. Again, as I said, you want to heavily reward students in the first 2 months so that this becomes so routine they can start the class without you. And this is where on Tuesday, I'm going to pull any struggling readers. So people that I know had trouble with the article, I might pull them privately. And I might just read over the article again to make sure they understand it, to make sure they know all the words, and to really dive back into that text. We want to encourage students to go back to the text. We don't want them to guess on things. Then I might take a group to work on morphology. So if I have a really low group, I'm going to take them and look at their spelling words. Maybe I want to look at words with similar patterns and really help them dive into those so that they can think of other words that might look the same. And then it expands the vocabulary that they are able to read. They're also going to reread the article to answer the questions that are assigned that day. So, for example, here's my day 2 task. You'll notice it's fairly light. This could also be a day 1 task. Sometimes it's a day 1 task. But it's going to be fairly light because they're still working on getting things done in their bell ringers, in their morphology. And so we want to give them some extra time, and we don't want them to fall behind on work. You don't want the workload so heavy that they feel defeated by Tuesday. You want it to stay fairly light. And at the end of the period, I try to do a mini writing or shared reading lesson with the whole class. Usually I try to do writing, but it really does vary on what I think they need. And then I'm also going to build in time for some read aloud. And this is where I put my read aloud. So if I have 12 minutes left, that's how long read aloud time is. If I have 18 minutes left, that's how long read aloud time is. And at the beginning of the year, that read aloud time might be longer because I might not do as many writing lessons or shared reading lessons as I'm trying to build routines and trying to encourage kids to love reading. So they might be engrossed in a book for the beginning of the year, and that's okay. So we're going to build in some more read aloud time. Your first 2 months should not look like any other months in school. So September, and I would say to me, mid-October, are very, very different than the rest of the year. They are going to be all about building routines, building confidence, building a love of reading, and that's what you really want. So, Wednesday, students are going to begin again with silent reading. If you have any struggling readers, again, you want to review the morphology focus of the week because it's not really about memorizing words. I actually don't mark my spelling tests on Friday, and I tell parents that I mark them, like I give them a mark, but it doesn't go on the report cards. So parents that are worried about that, I always say, listen, don't be worried about that. All I'm looking for is, are they trying? Because it's a learning skill for me. Did they pay attention when we were doing this in class so that they didn't make silly mistakes that they should have avoided if they'd actually paid attention? And then the students are going to reread the article to answer the questions they are assigned. The last part of the period, I'm going to do either mini writing or shared reading. And I would spend about 20 minutes doing shared reading or writing, whichever I choose. And again, the remaining part, whatever's left over, that's my read aloud time. Now, I definitely have a lot more read aloud time on Friday. So Friday, we tend to spend more time reading aloud. And that's great because it makes Friday a little bit fun for them because we always do a spelling quiz. Again, it's not marked, but it makes it so that they end with a very high note in language. They love it because we do first chapter Friday. So I read the first chapter of a book that I think I can get them to get hooked on, or a book that I think will appeal to somebody, but they're just not brave enough to pick it up. I often keep these first chapter Friday books in a separate area of my classroom so students don't have access to them regularly. They're not in the book bins, which makes them all the more special so that they have to come to me to sign them out. And they're really looking at, wow, that was really neat. I didn't even think of that kind of book, and I love the sound of it. So I try to gear these to students that I know are maybe not yet strong readers, but they could be. And if they read more, they would be. So these are books that I had a guy that loved historical fiction reading from the I Survived series. That was it. His mom had to buy him all the scholastics on it because he just got so hooked and he ran out of all of the ones in my room. So that's where you really want to build that. And then I also read the book that whatever we're reading in the classroom. So whatever our current read aloud book is. This one is taken from my grade 4 article series on ancient civilizations. It doesn't matter which one you take it from. There are all different types of language. You can do my reading articles in any order. I do have a suggested order. It's in my long range plans for language. But honestly, you can do them in any order and you will cover all your reading expectations. It really dives into the comprehension part. There are some morphological parts of it, but the other part it dives into is some media. So you'll find a lot of media tasks in here. You can mark them and use those as your media tasks, absolutely. And they will really give you some great media marks. Thursday. Students begin again with silent reading. If you have any struggling readers, you're going to review that morphology focus. They reread the article to answer the questions that are assigned that day. So for example, this is from my grade 6 space series on Chris Hadfield, and it's on summarizing, which is a skill I find students have a lot of struggle with. So I make sure to build that into my language program because I want them to practice taking information from the text and summarizing it. And they don't necessarily have to write it in paragraphs on here. I'm just looking at point form because really, let's be honest, if they go on to higher level education, writing in point form is going to be very crucial for them. Learning how to find the information. And most jobs, you need to know how to find information quickly. So this is a great skill for them to have no matter where they're going. The last third of the period, I have do a really mini writing or shared reading lesson with the whole class, but really, it really does depend on what they need. So if for science, I need to build in some shared reading time because I want to cover that content, then I might build that in. If I find that students are having trouble maybe with fluency and how to read out loud, then I might build that in there. But I don't always build it in on Thursday because I find it might be too much if they've done it already. Then we also build in some typing and cursive time on Thursday. Typing Thursday. You could have typing Tuesday too. It doesn't matter where you put it. I just find Tuesdays busy for me, so I tend to put it on Thursday because it's the end of the week, and it's almost an artistic thing if you're doing cursive, and it's almost mindless thing if you're doing typing. So it kind of is nice at the end of the period and the end of the week to me. But you put it in where it works for you. And then again, whatever time is left over is my read aloud time. Okay, so on Friday, it's again going to look very different. It's going to be similar to Monday in the sense that it's just going to be an odd day. We complete a spelling quiz if you do that. If you don't do that, then maybe you put something else in that place. Maybe you put more cursive or typing, whichever works for you. Then they begin again with silent reading, and then they reread the article to answer the questions that are assigned that day. So the Friday question is often a little longer. So I tell students, I give them all the questions ahead, but I tell them to look ahead and figure out which one is going to take the longest. And whenever you have more time during the week, do that. And then I might be conferencing with anyone who needs help writing and is past the final stage of editing. So I have a list of writing stages of editing things to do first before they come to me and before they hand it in. And so they have to pass all those stages before they get to conferencing, and they have to conference before they can hand something in. So it really puts the onus on them on what they've already tried before they get to me, and it takes some of the weight off of me. And then, of course, the final. I build in about 20 minutes here for read aloud, because I really want to give them some time at the end of the period to do the first chapter Fridays and really jump into that. So that read aloud time, that's going to be longer. So what are the kids doing while I'm reading? And I've already gone over a lot of this, but silent reading, spiral language, morphology, cursive, typing, writing, whatever task was last assigned. So writing, it will depend on where we are. I might have already given them a task last week and they're still working on it. If I haven't, I might be assigning a task. It's just where they are. Cursive. I don't base cursive on where I think they should be. We really do start with a baseline assessment, and then students are assigned specific tasks according to their level. So the baseline task is usually my cursive art. So can they do the cursive art? How are they doing with it? Is their pencil grip okay? Is their formation of the letters the way it should be? And if not, so maybe I start them with letters, and then I move on to words, and then I move on to sentences, and then I move on to quote reflections. And that's all included in my cursive package if you're looking for one, but you can also do it yourself, whichever you prefer. So what can go wrong? So you can get students off tasks, students being careless, or work not completed in the time allotted. So I'm going to go through what I do for each one. So students off task, I think really this owes to my heavy rewards in the beginning of the year. Like, every couple minutes, I'm rewarding somebody for doing what they're supposed to be doing. And I'm doing that in between doing initial assessments. And that really helps with later. But when they are off task and I'm trying to work with a guided reading group, I also have classroom jobs. So I might assign somebody as the person to go around and say, hey, you need to be doing this. Somebody might get a desk buddy. And that person might be just quietly reminding people. But I will stop an entire lesson and go over and address the off-task behavior. I find if I don't, then first of all, nobody in my lesson is going to learn anything. But second, that person whoever is off task is learning that it's okay. And I don't want that. The other thing that can go wrong is students being careless with their work, and it kind of goes hand in hand with work not completed in the time allotted. So students being careless for sure. If I find after the second week, I don't usually do anything the first week, but the second week that students are being careless, I will immediately call them in and we can discuss it. And I make note of that. So met with Sherry, and Sherry was having trouble completing her work, and she has promised that it is going to get better, and this is her strategy to get better at it. And then if it does not improve in the next 5 days, we have a meeting with mom or dad if possible. or whoever the guardian is, because we need to address that really early. The earlier you address it, the easier your year will go, especially because then the parents know that you're already on top of things. And then the final thing, which kind of goes with it, but work not completed in the time allotted. Now, this really does depend on the student, I will say. So I have some students where a visual schedule will really help them, and then a checklist right on their desk, because the smartboard is not enough. If I find I see a student going up to the smartboard in the first 2 weeks to check that they've done everything, then they probably need a visual schedule on their desk or a checklist on their desk. The older they get, the less a visual schedule works, I find, depending on the student, and more a checklist works. And it can be very small, discrete, black and white, taped on their desk. Usually I tape it right over, I usually do name tags at the beginning of the year, so usually I tape it right on top of that, or right below it, so that it's not interfering with and it doesn't look obvious for everybody else. Or if it's really bothering them, we can tape it inside a notebook, or we can tape it inside, if they've got one of the flat pencil cases, the plastic ones, I can tape it inside that. Whatever is going to work best for that student. And usually I do that in consultation with the student. I've noticed you're not completing your work. We can't have that. That's not going to work. So I want to give you a schedule so that you can check it off every day. Where would you like to put it? And here are a couple options. I do not recommend like locker. I've had students suggest that to me. So I've learned to give the options that I want first. You can put it on your desk right below. You can put it on your pencil case, or you can put it inside your notebook. Where would you prefer? And then I usually start with, and remember, you need it to be visible enough that you're going to remember to do this. So we do that. If that works best. I also, again, in the first couple of weeks, would call parents in and say, hey, I'm noticing things aren't getting done. Is there anything going on? How can I help? How can we help the student to be successful? And you want it to be a fairly positive meeting. Like, this is not about a mark yet. This is just, this is what I'm noticing. I know there's adjustments coming to this grade. What can we do to help? And you might get a huge story that you weren't aware of. Or you might find parents saying, well, yeah, that was a problem last year. So whatever it is, you want to make sure you address it early. And that is all I have today on my reading article series, and how I run my guided reading groups. If you are interested in finding out more, you're going to want to go to Facebook, Mrs. S Room, or at Mrs. S Room on Instagram. MrsSroom.com is my Canadian website. I know it says .com, but it is Canadian. However, I will say that if you are looking for digital items, like my math slides in digital, that is on TPT, and so you'll find me at Mrs. S Room on TPT. Remember, there's 2 Mrs. S Rooms. One is health, and I have math, language, and science content.